Welcome you all. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this exciting workshop on the outcomes of Mandate 420. I know that many people has registered to this meeting. I'm only giving some slides, two recommendations to take the most of this meeting. First of all, as some people will need captions, you need to activate it. You need to activate the captions in the Zoom, and that way you will be able to check them. Okay. Second, about the questions and answers, you know that there's a part of the last part of the meeting or the workshop is dedicated to question and answers from the audience. As there's so many people registered that we have decided that the question and answer will be managed through the question and answers section of the Zoom meeting. So you can send your question and answers via the Zoom, and your questions and answers will be moderated and answers at the very end of the meeting, as you can see in the agenda. So we want to be agile. We only have a bit more than 2 hours and a lot of things a lot of information to transmit, to share. So we want your feedback, but in order to be agile and to make sure that we can make it in the time that we have been assessed, that we have been given, we will cover all those question and answers at the very end of the meeting. Okay. I can see that the captions are working perfectly. You can see the sign language translations in international sign language at the same time. We are more than 200 people already. And Javier, I think that we have very tight agenda, so whenever you want.
Okay, thank you, Fernando. Good morning to everybody. My name is Javier Garcia, and I have the pleasure to work as the Director General of the Spanish Standards Organization, UNE. And it's for me a pleasure to welcome you to this workshop where we are going to present today the results of this exercise of standardization works of public-private partnership put in practice. And this is what standardization is about. This beautiful tool where we sit together to develop solutions to the challenges that society is facing. And today we have a fantastic example of what this means, how through a standardization, all of you, many of you, a huge amount of experts from all over Europe have been able to provide solutions to a challenge that the European policymaker, the European Commission, put on our table, on the table of SEN, of the European Standardization Standards Committee, a long time ago, in 2008. This was a challenge to everybody to see how we could contribute to provide solutions to the European implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. For UNE, the organization that I have the pleasure to manage, this has been from the start a strategic objective, and we have put our efforts in supporting the best we could the works of the working groups in SEN where not only the answer to this mandate 420 that we are addressing today, but also other mandates from the European Commission on ICT accessibility, for example, have taken place. And I want to refer to the values of standardization, why this beautiful tool has been the one chosen to deliver these solutions. Well, these are the values: the openness of the processes in which we work. Those processes that are based on experience for many years, that guarantee that the knowledge that is put on these tables is going to be well managed and finally built into standards recognized by the market. This is not always easy because we work under a key word, a key value, which is consensus. And reaching consensus on almost anything, but amongst over 43 national standards bodies from 34 countries is not easy. Many of you have participated in this exercise and many of you are aware about what I'm talking about. Also very relevant, and I must mention this at the beginning of this session, I want to highlight the participation of those that are most affected by the content of these standards. And this is the communities of people with disabilities and older people. Their participation through the national delegations of the national standards bodies into the European standardization table has been critical for the success of this exercise. Before I finish, let me also share with you some information on other standards works related with accessibility, in which we from Spain are having this leading role at international level. One of them has to do precisely with the source document that was put on the table for the development of this European standard 17210. That was ISO 21542. This is a document that was developed again with the support of UNE and Spanish stakeholders more closely related to this area. Also, at international level, UNE is starting the works on the future standardization document on accessibility of immovable cultural heritage. And last but not least, together with our fantastic partner, Fundación 11, Jesus, it's always a pleasure to work with you. We are in the coming weeks, I don't know what exactly is the time frame, but in the very short term, we are going to publish the first international ISO standard on accessible tourism. So all of these elements, all of these works that contribute to ensuring that the needs of all users are considered into our current societal challenges. I thank you very much for your attention. I wish that the workshop really is up to the expectations it has risen, and I will now give the floor to my colleague and very good friend, Cinzia Mitsiroli from the Sensenelec Management Center. She is the Director of Standardization and Digital Solutions for Sensenelec, and I'm very happy to give her the floor now to address to all of you. Cinzia, please.
Thank you very much, Javier, and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here with you today to celebrate the publication of this crucial standard for the accessibility in the built environment. I've been working for Sensenelec for 15 years now, and I've actually followed the evolution of these projects from afar over the last years. As you might be aware, SAN and SENELEC are two of the three European standardization organizations recognized by the European Union and the European Free Trade Association, EFTA, for developing European standards at European level, as per Regulation 1025/2012. SAN and SENELEC are composed by 43 national standardization organizations in 34 countries, that are those of the National Standardization Organization of the 27 European member states, UK, the Republic of North Macedonia, Serbia, Turkey, as well as the three countries of EFTA, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland. The European standardization system is actually unique in the world and strictly respects the founding principle defined by the World Trade Organization in the field of standardization, namely coherence, transparency, openness, consensus, voluntary application, and independence from special interest. Over the last 60 years, thanks to the involvement of an impressive number of national stakeholders nominated by SAN and SENELEC members, as well as European stakeholders representing business, industry association, small and medium enterprises, public authorities, trade association, consumer organization, environmental organization. European standards reflect not only the scientific and technical state of the art, but they are also take into consideration the concerns and priorities of wider society. As a matter of fact, an essential required characteristic of European standard is that it results from consensus of all interested parties. You have heard Javier referring to consensus, and I think that throughout this workshop, you will hear more and more again this crucial word for standardization. Once published, European standards shall be implemented by the SAN and SENELEC members, with the obligation to withdraw any national standards that would conflict with the European standards. Hence, one European standards becomes the national standards in all 34 member countries of SAN and SENELEC, ensuring a common level of quality, safety, security, and sustainability. And as you see, what a powerful tool a European standard is. And whenever possible, we go for one single global solution, thanks to our cooperation agreement with ISO and IEC, the Frankfurt and the Vienna Agreement. However, while the obligation to implement European standards is on our members, I would like to stress that their use by stakeholders remain voluntary. As Javier was referring to already, SAN and SENELEC have been involved in the development of a series of standards in relation to accessibility, following requests from the European Commission. And these are namely in the field of e-accessibility, as well as for the inclusion in design for all in relevant standardization activity. Without, of course, forgetting the work that we are celebrating here all together today, the one in relation to accessibility requirements for public procurement in the built environment. The work that was requested quite a number of years ago by the European Commission was actually carried out by a joint technical committee between SAN and SENELEC, JTC 11. And the outcome is the standards that we are going to present to you today, that is EN 17210, that was published a few weeks ago. I cannot forget to mention that this particular standard was developed not only thanks to the contribution of those experts that were representing our national members, but it was done also in cooperation with key European stakeholders, like ANEC, the European Association representing consumer interest in standardization, EDF, the European Disability Forum, AGE, Platform Europe, that represented the voice of older persons, ENAT, European Network for Accessible Tourism, SBS, the Small Business Standards representing small and medium enterprises, ETSA, the European Textile Services Association, and of course, the European Commission. I think we can say that it's been really the celebration of consensus among a huge, wide network of experts. I wish you an excellent workshop. I know that is a very short 2 hours intense discussion, but I really hope that you'll take the most out of it and you can find it absolutely informative. Thank you very much. And once again, I wish you an excellent workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Cinzia. Thank you very much for your words of opening. And last for this session of opening of the workshop, it's my pleasure to give the floor now to Jesus Hernandez Galan, who, in addition to Director of Accessibility and Innovation in Fundación 11, we had the pleasure to count with him as the chair of this Sense and Elect Joint Technical Committee that Cinzia now referred to, number 11, the one that was responsible for the development of this standard. So, Jesus, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Javier, thank you very much. Welcome to everybody. We are very near to 300 people, so this workshop has a huge expectations because the mandate and the standard what we are talking about now is very important. I would like to start say congratulations to all of us, because as Cinzia told, it was a great group of stakeholders working together, following the consensus and obtain the consensus about this important standard. And I would like to start to say thank you to the European Commission to launch this mandate, the 420, and to obtain this standard. And thank you to UNE to take the role of the secretary, our permanent partner. As Javier told, we work in a lot of standards about accessibility in Spain and in Europe, as he told before, an international standard, as ISO about the accessible tourism. It was a long trip. The European Commission started to think about that in 2006. More than 15 years working together to develop this standard. The phase one started in 2008, and we start to think about that, to know what there are about accessibility and building environment in different countries, to know the state of the art, and after that we start to develop the standard. As I told, more than 15 years working together, solving problems. It wasn't an easy path, an easy way, but we have to solve different problems following the consensus, to take the consensus of all the stakeholders. But now we have a common criteria in Europe, and this is the most important thing I think about this standard. We have a common tool to help to the procurers, to help to the architects, to help to the designers to implement the accessibility. For that, now the accessibility in building environment meaning the same thing in all the countries in Europe. For that, I think this is the importance of this standard. As I told, now the public administration, when they want to buy a building environment, a station, a building, or a street, they have a tool to introduce and implement the accessibility, the same accessibility in all the countries. And I would like to highlight the importance of the standard. Now we have a guide, a very, very useful guide about accessibility, focus on functional requirement. So it's focus on what the people with disability needs, what we can do, what we cannot do, and the standard has 2 technical reports. I think the second one is very important, the conformity assessment, to evaluate, to assess the conformity with the building, with the works, about the standard. And the technical report 1 has figures, numbers, very useful for architects, for designers. They need numbers, how to apply, to complement the standard. I would like to highlight too the experts. We had in this group, I think, the best experts on accessibility in Europe, coming from different countries. For that, they have different perspectives. They belong to different societies. For that, working all together, we have a common tool for all Europe. And the other thing I would like to highlight is the importance of the people with disabilities working in this standard. Cynthia talked about that, about the EDF, the different associations, the different organizations of people with disability. I was the chair of this mandate, this group, working together, but I am wheelchair, so maybe I'm the wheelchair man, the wheelchair person of the standard. So the people with disability needs has been very, very present in all the works we have developed in this standard. I don't want to finish without saying thank you very much to Inmaculada Placencia for his idea for launch this mandate, to promote this tool, and now we have this very useful tool. And of course, Fernando working day by day to looking for the consensus tool. He stay every day working to obtain this very useful standard. So thank you, UNE, thank you, Censenalec, thank you, European Commission. We have to congratulate about this standard.
Thank you very much, Jesus, as always. And I'm sure we will have many more opportunities to celebrate standards like the one today in the future. So let's go for the rest of the program, which is really the important part for everybody. So Fernando, you take the steering wheel of the session from now on. Okay.
Thank you very much, Javier. So the next part of the workshop will be dedicated to the impulse of the European Commission of Common Accessibility Criteria through Europe. Inmaculada Placencia Porrero will be the person presenting that. Inmaculada Placencia Porrero is a senior expert in disability and inclusion at the Directorate and DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion at the European Commission. Her unit is responsible for the coordination of European policies for persons with disabilities. She works on European disability policies, including the European Disability Strategy 210 to 220, and the implementation of the UN Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. Inmaculada holds a degree in physics and computer science and worked in research and development before joining the European Commission in 1991. She has worked on research programs addressing accessibility as well as assistive technologies, and was deputy head of unit for various disability-related units in the Commission. Her work in the inclusion unit of the DJ for Information Society and Media addressed accessibility policy. While at DJ for Justice, she contributed to disability-related anti-discrimination legislation. She was responsible for the task force for the preparation of the European Accessibility Act and remains responsible for it since its adoption in 2015. She is currently under the DJ for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion And she also worked on the preparation of the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities 2021-2030. So Inmaculada, please.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much. I don't know why the video, oh yeah, now it's working.
And Inmaculada, I forgotten to say the most important thing, which is that you are the alma mater, or the person who improves the 4 mandates that have been launched by the European Commission on accessibility. The 4 of them have been, well, or the 3 of them mainly, and the 4th also on ICT, on the web accessibility. You were the person pushing forward to make this a reality. So thank you very much.
Thank you. No, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to for the previous speakers for. I want to join their thanks to the to all the stakeholders that have participated in all these years on the work on this mandate that has led to the standard EN 17210. I would like to say that I'm going to give you a little overview of this adventure, because at the time when we launched the mandate, it was a kind of adventure, and I will not enter into the content of the standard, because that's going to be done by the real experts, who are the ones that do the work. So I will, in my presentation, focus on the process. Let me say that in 2006, when we started talking about the barriers that persons with disabilities experience across different member states, as a continuation of, on one hand, of an expert group that was launched in 2003 because of the European Year of Persons with Disabilities, it was not evident to take action at European level, more than raising awareness and providing some support. I have to say that in that at that time, discussions with ANEC were really very important for me to discover, let's say, also the potential for the built environment. I had already been doing the mandates, as Fernando has said, on ICT, and there is no doubt of the, let's say, internal market relevance of ICT. There are no borders to ICT. However, when we were talking about the built environment, many people did not believe that action should be taken at European level, and were more firm into the views that this was a pure national, even local matter for accessibility. But we had also a lot of contacts with users with disabilities that were telling more and more about the difficulties cross-border. And also, I have to say that the work that we were undertaking in the area of ICT with the US Access Board, that have been pioneering in setting accessibility standards and link them to enforcement, strong enforcement with legislation, was really instrumental. We really saw that the requirements or the barriers that the barriers that persons experience were similar, and that something really needed to be done to advance, because users were reporting that the improvement of the built environment was kind of stagnated, and also that not only we're talking about the removal of barriers, but that at the time, and I'm afraid that it might be, it is also to a certain extent, I hope lesser extent, the situation today. New buildings were not accessible still at the time, and were not made accessible. And also when buildings were renovated, barriers for accessibility were kept. So given those, let's say, difficulties to support this European dimension, we started slowly. We started by having what was called at the time a programmatic mandate. So first we needed to know what was available, and what was the problem, defining the accessibility standardization problem in this area. And to that end, a very good study was provided. I really want to thank also all the team, but in particular also Monica Klenovec, who has been from the very beginning of the work in this first phase, working very hard to have this overview and analysis of over 300 documents that clarified, in my view, two important things. One, that there were many legislations, building codes, guidelines, standards, all kinds of documents addressing the built environment, that to a certain extent they all covered certain elements, like, you know, ramps at the entrance of a building, but very few addressed things like cognitive orientation in the buildings for persons with cognitive disabilities, or very few address the safety and evacuation routes. So some critical things, or even accessibility in natural environments. So there were certain things that were missing, and there were certain things that were duplicated, or let's say addressed in different ways, leading to different solutions. So this really justified advancing and taking action. I think that it was essential at the time also to clarify what is accessibility, and avoid that accessibility was seen as a disturbance to the creativity of architects, and that we should remove the tension that was being between making a building accessible and by that useful for all persons, including those with disabilities, and a conceptual design that at the end was not possible to use by persons with disabilities. I have to say that at this time is when we were approaching the mandate, the second phase of the mandate. Things had changed. We already had the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Member states were a party to the convention. The EU is a party to the convention, at least most of them, when we did this second phase, and it really put the focus on equal rights and access on equal basis with others. So we had an additional good justification to do this work. And at that moment also a lot of organizations, and I don't want to miss anybody, but we that have participated in the first phase of the mandate, and I want also to mention, you know, ENAD, EDF, and AGE, and you know, all the users organizations, but also a great number of experts were ready to embark in the second phase of the mandate. The negotiation of that phase took some time, and it took some time because still the field was not ready to set up common technical requirements. The divergence between different national and regional rules was clear, and it would have been very, very difficult to have a technical standard with one measure, for example, for the gradation of a ramp, to take something very obvious and simple. So we came with this idea of having a two-stages approach. One, to have these functional requirements that would really clarify, and which we hope it would allow to build consensus of what is needed in order to have a building accessible. And second, a technical report in which persons would be that want to build accessibility would have a clear guidance and a clear reference in order to how to build those accessibility functional requirements. I have to say that looking to the standard and the reports, it's important to see how wide those requirements are and the areas that are addressed. I mean, we're talking as accessibility first about as a process, because it's not a one-off activity, and it deals really with outdoors areas, route to approach buildings, and also a number of specific types of built environment, for example, that related to transport, specific requirements for some public buildings, but also, as I mentioned before, outdoor facilities like gardens and beaches, and the very important issue, because is about safety and evacuation of buildings. So it provides really a very complete set of requirements for different types of buildings, processes, and uses of those buildings. Already the first report contained an overview of which areas needed to contain accessibility requirements, and that first report, I've said it to the team doing the work, was already very useful and inspirational for the preparation of the European Accessibility Act, a legislation in which we have accessibility requirements for the built environment where services under the directive are provided. We're talking about, and you will recognize the language, use of related outdoor areas and facilities, approaches to buildings, horizontal circulation, vertical circulation, rooms used by the public, and so forth and so forth. Even equipment and facilities used in the provision of the service, how they fit into the built environment. So it was really useful to have this first outcome of the mandate, because it justified this common approach towards building accessibility. While the standard was being made, and I have to say, we launched the mandate early 2007, and it's now 2021, so really quite a number of years. Well, it was approved 2020 October, but quite a number of years before it was there. We did not stop the policy and legal work on accessibility. Accessibility in the meantime has become mandatory. We made it mandatory at European level in the directives for public procurement. So buying accessible works, as it is the work used in the public procurement directives, when those works are going to be used by people, and it doesn't matter whether it's the public or the members of the staff, is an obligation. It is an obligation under the European structural funds. When new funds are spent, accessibility must be observed. But also, we have embarked now into presenting accessibility as a win-win element in the sustainability and of buildings, and also in the new developments under the Green Deal on the renovation wave for energy efficiency. Those policy and legal documents spell out that when when doing deep renovations in buildings for energy efficiency, it is very, very important that accessibility is also done. And we have some recommendations for renovation of buildings. Let me also say that we have been now reflecting accessibility in some key initiatives, like flagship initiatives like the new European Bauhaus that contains three main areas, one of them being inclusion and accessibility features there prominently. Also on research, we have been investing in a new public-private partnership, Build for All, and you will see that there will be a boost on to support the development of accessibility in the built environment. Now, to finish, I would like to mention a couple of things. First of all, that in the new disability strategy, the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities, which was adopted on the 3rd of March, accessibility continues to have and feature prominently as an enabler of rights. In the strategy, we focus now on implementation. We have been in the past strategy investing in the development of the standards, the framework, the what to do. Now we really need to do it and implement and focus on that. For that, the strategy calls on the training and ensuring the capacity and skills of professionals to build accessible, to implement accessibility, and also one nice element of the strategy is that the Commission proposes to lead by example in its buildings and makes reference to bring European buildings to align with European standards. So this EN 17210 will play a prominent role. As I said, accessibility is not a one-off thing, so I would like also to call your attention to the outcome of Mandate 473 on accessibility following Design for All, EN 17161, that says what an organization needs to do in order to deliver accessible, because it could inspire for management of buildings, for the building itself, construction companies to know how to deliver accessible. On the legislation side, on the Accessibility Act, the built environment is a choice. Member states can decide to mandate or to ensure that the accessibility requirements in the Act have to be compliant with where the services are provided, in the building where the services are provided, and it is a choice. And so now that we are in the transposition phase, member states are making that choice. And I think that for the benefit of persons with disabilities, we're convinced that it is really very important to adopt, to embrace those requirements, because they are complete and they are coherent across the EU. To finish on the Accessibility Act, just to say that I'm working now in the preparation of a new mandate, and a mandate that is required for the Accessibility Act. And soon, by June this year, we will have a draft that will be available for all of you to comment to and to provide your inputs. That's all from my side. I really want to thank everybody that participated in this adventure. Of course, also SEN and the UNE, and also Fundación 11, who has been doing the secretariat, also the presidency of the group, and yeah, and all the experts and those that contributed at national level, because really we have a great document that now we really have to use. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Imma. Thanks for all the impulse and support you've given to the standardization related to accessibility. And as I don't want to go having more some delays. Let's go directly to the next phase. The next part of the event will be dedicated to the EN 17210, which is the first European standard on accessibility of the built environment. And Monica Kleinovic and Soren Ginerup are going to be the ones explaining us the standard. We are very lucky to have them on board, because Monica is the project leader of the project team leader on these works, and Soren is one of the project team experts. For you to know who's Monica, Monica is an architect and an expert on accessibility. She's an architect and access consultant and university lecturer in Vienna. She's also an expert on accessibility of the built environment. She runs also the EU Erasmus intensive programs on culture and tourism for all. She also worked on the development of the first vision of the International Standard 21542 on accessibility and usability of the built environment, and she's also currently working on the actual revision. She was the founder and chair of Design for All Austria in the previous years, and she also does access consultancy and coaching, seminar and trainings for professionals, and accessibility interior design exhibitions, design handbook for barrier-free living, design for research projects, author and jury member related to accessibility. So she's a real expert on this field. And Soren, who will talk after Monica, he's also a project team expert. He previously worked for the Danish Building Research Institute. He's been working as a consultant on accessibility, built environments, building regulations, and information on this for about 25 years, and a lot of the time in standardization. In his opinion, this is one of the best ways of learning from other countries, which is an opinion that I share with you, sorry. This is a very important point of accessibility when we are talking about the European and international level. So I give you the floor, and thank you very much. Monica, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fernando, for this nice introduction. And I will focus in this first presentation, first part on the EN 17 to 10. And next slide, please. First, want to introduce my great team coming all over Europe. Soren, as I already mentioned, is my continuing speaker, mainly focusing on the figures with the nice design of all the figures. Then Delfin Jimenez from Spain. He will also talk today on the TR 17622 report. Then Katerina Papamichael coming from Greece. She was working a lot also in the last years in the tourism area. Isabella Tizian Stefan coming from Italy. She's also an architect and ergonomist and dealing at the moment a lot with the lift standards improvement, and also member of ANEC. And Carol Thomas, finally, from United Kingdom. She's also an expert consultant and also a member of ANEC and dealing with a lot of other accessibility issues in standardization and also a building practice. Next slide, please. Yeah, how it starts, this big work, as Ima just reported, it is a long-term approach, but this mandate in support of European accessibility requirements for public procurement in the built environment was already started in 2009, I remember, if I remember correctly. And we worked 2 years on this first phase of the report. And it was started and supported from the very beginning by this project team of experts for founding a consensus. A new joint TC 11 between CEN and CENELEC was established with focusing on accessibility in the built environment, to have the backing up from the European member states, from the national standardization bodies, and to include also the other experts from Europe. In the phase 1, we focused on the inventory, on analysis, and on the feasibility of European and international accessibility standards, guides, and other documents, especially on regulations in the built environment. And it was very clear from the very beginning that we have different approaches over Europe. There are countries that have dealt with accessibility only in building regulations. There are others which have also long-term standards on accessibility, so they are focusing, of course, on the one side on the building regulations, which has every country available in this field, and on the other side also standards or guidelines. But there are only 7 countries in Europe which have special detailed accessibility standards. 2 of them have also implemented the ISO 21542 as their national standardization document. So we have a different approach, and this was also the reason that we agreed to have in phase 2 3 different deliverables. We have this approach with the EN focusing on functional requirements only, and then supported by not mandatory documents, which are technical reports, including the technical criteria which we found in other standards. And the one document is the tier 1, I say it shortly, tier 1, then later you know the number is 17621, which is focusing then the technical performance criteria and specifications. And the second document should focus on conformity assessment, how the EN can be fulfilled. Next slide, please. As Ima already told us, and Cinzia, that we had a lot of participation from European observers and liaison officers. I don't want to read it out again, only maybe the key organizations as ANEC, Age Platform, EDF, ENAT. So we had a lot of different organizations participating from the very beginning, and also a large group of really active members. There were 15 about from 20 participating countries. So we have a broad consensus platform to either support or to change or to revise our first draft of this EN and of the Tier 1 and Tier 2. Next slide, please. Yeah, how was the work done? The phase 1 was about 2 years, from 2009 till the end of 2011, and focusing mostly on research and analysis. The phase 2 started after a break in 2016, let's say in August more or less, and is finished now with the delivery of the EN, of the published EN in beginning of January. And Tier 1 and Tier 2 are now under approval vote procedure, which will end at 22 of April next month. We had 13 plenary meetings until now, and also 4 small group meetings to find consensus on the high number of comments we received in the different stages. We had also a first open workshop in 2019. Perhaps some of you remember. We were focusing mainly on the inquiry of the EN and presented it to the public. And in 2019, we had in the first draft, we presented this draft during inquiry vote. And the 5th draft, with all the comments considered, which we get in the different phases, we published the formal vote. And now it is already out for publication, and will be translated in other languages. And I can really say it was an approval by large majority of all the participating national member bodies. Next slide, please. This EN 70-10 has a complete new approach. It is not very common for technical standards to focus only on functional requirements. But I think it was a good way to come forward to find a compromise and approach within European standardization and regulation. As I mentioned before, that this subject is dealt with mainly in building regulations. So it is the best approach to make this on functional requirements. What needs the users can enjoy a building or a built environment or the outdoor environment. Another very important approach is our didactic approach with this so-called rationale at the beginning of each main clause, which explains to the reader, to the public procurer, to the architect, where are the problems in this section, for instance, on stairs, what we have to deal with, and how it can be solved. So it has an educational approach also. And from the very beginning, we decided also to include many figures, which Soren will later explain a little bit more, which showing also some inappropriate solutions, not only the good ones, but also where we deleted the bad ones, which are very often introduced in the building practice, and to make people aware of it. Sometimes such an inappropriate figure tells you even more than the correct one. We have divided this standard in 2 parts, in basic accessibility requirements and recommendations, and in the later part is dealing with additionally specific use buildings and outdoor areas. That was this comprehensive approach and the outcome from the phase 1 that we need some other areas to cover this in this standard. So it's really, it's covering the whole built environment, you can say. And then we have included also several elements which are not covered in ISO 21542, which was from the very beginning for us a very important approach to include or base our functional requirements on this important international standard on the market. We included now in the EN 7210 also the urban spaces, areas, the pedestrian crossings, and the new subject on shared spaces. They're complicated and critical from some points of view, but if they are designed properly, they can also be accessible, of course. Then we have a big clause on emergency evacuation and dealing also with adaptable housing, which is in an aging society, I think very important that you can stay at home as long as you want. It is really a comprehensive horizontal European standard on accessibility of the built environment. What means horizontal? Horizontal means, in my understanding, that this standard should be a so-called guidance also for other vertical product standards or vertical standards dealing with a small part of this standardization field. So there should be a guidance available where the other standardization bodies and standards can focus on. The higher guidance is this design for all standard, which is 17161, dealing on like an umbrella standard, but this one should be considered by the all standardization activities in the built environment. Next slide, please. Yeah, what are the sources of information and guidance in the EN 17210 included? The base main base standard is the ISO 21542 from 2011, which was in parallel also under revision. It is the standard dealing with accessibility and usability of the built environment. And in some areas, we referred also into the ISO DIS, this means so-called the inquiry version of the standard. This is already done with additional brackets, and it is mentioned. So when you read the standard, when you see no reference, then it is based on the ISO, and on all other areas, of course, in product areas where we have to refer to other ENs, it's done like this, what you have to consider additionally. Then another big focus was on the standards on railway applications in the infrastructure, the so-called TSI PRM standards, which are widely applied, of course, since years in Europe. And there are some important subjects as contrast information and the requirements for obstacle-free routes for infrastructure, which we also decided to take it as a basis, as many countries are even using this for the so-called built environment regulations. And finally, we focused on specific ENs, of course, and product-related ENs, such on lifts, for instance, or on other products, then on national standards or on guidance on specific matters. Next slide, please. Yeah, how we, you know that the EGN has a maybe similar content, and it is a structure given by the standardization body. So it's focusing on the scope, it's dealing with the normative references or terms and definitions. Then we included an own clause on the legal and policy background, to give a larger overview on the full situation in the built environment. Then we had another big section on the diversity of users and design considerations, also considering the Sensenelec Guide number 6, where some of you are very aware about it. And then the two main parts on the basic functional requirements and recommendations and on the specific use buildings and environments. Next slide, please. Going in more detail. I don't want to read out now all the basics. I think you are aware of it. The starting basis may be an important one about wayfinding. You find in brackets, you can read it out later, what kind of sub clauses are included therein. So of course, we have this arrival and departure areas. We have horizontal and vertical circulation dealt with. Also specific areas, sanitary accommodation. Yeah, fire safety for all is a very important issue about evacuation and emergency exits. And finally, also some clauses about acoustics, lighting, and indoor climate and environmental conditions. Next slide, please. When we come to the specific uses of buildings, it's the big section on accommodation, dealing with hotels and also with adaptable housing. Then a large group of cultural, leisure, and sport buildings. Then on administration, service and employments buildings, and outdoor and urban areas, dealing with playgrounds, gardens, parks, and beaches even. And finally, the last section is dealing on transport facilities, where we refer also to the European guidelines and directives on this subject, of course. And this is dealing from taxis over bus and coaches on metros up to ports and cable car facilities. Next slide, please. Now coming to the scope. What is the scope is the most important element of a standard where you can apply it. And it is defining this standard, the minimum functional requirements and recommendations for an accessible and usable built environment. And it's following the design for all or universal design principles, which will facilitate equitable and safe use for a wide range of users, including persons with disabilities. So we have here the real unique approach on design for all to provide more information about what is meant by this. And it is applicable across the full spectrum of the built environment. And it's relevant for the design, for the construction, for refurbishment or adaptation, and also a little bit on maintenance of the built environment, including outdoor pedestrian and urban areas. Next slide, please. Now, dealing with, that is an important element, this 5.3 clause, subclause, dealing with the key areas for an accessible built environment, which with the intention that the architect or the public procurer has an overview about the different basic elements. And with this slide, I want to hand over to Soren.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, this overview we think is important because we've provided, all these countries that have participated have provided the user with a very extensive document of 200-300 pages. And yeah, they can easily kill all the good intentions if you don't try to give sort of the short story also. So we've done that, attempted to do that and carry over what worked pretty well, we think, in the ISO 21542, where there's also a sort of table with a short overview, and it has been, in my view, improved a bit here in this standard. And in front of you, you see some of those key areas we mentioned under accessible and usable built environments. We mentioned pedestrian areas, approach to the building, entrances, routes, horizontal circulation, vertical rooms, equipment and facilities, toilets, sanitary facilities, exit and evacuation routes, and information via multiple sensors. And to the right, I've got placed two examples, one from entrances, where you see a sort of sketchy impression of an entrance where some of those key elements have been applied that you find in the detailed sections of the standard. And they are denoted by, in this case, 10 keys that I explained under the figure. And the second example, which has been highlighted here, is where you got information by multiple senses. And just as with the entrances, there's also an accessible route denotion of what happens in this figure. And we actually start outside of the built environment, in this case, with ICT and digital information, which today has to be accessible also by European law, by European standards, coordinated with what happens in most of the rest of the world. And we've tried to give here a presentation of what's essential when it comes to information. It's not just about what's in this, in a particular built environment. It's also about the information about this place, how to find your way, the information about what takes place, which today has to be accessible. And we think it's pretty important to, also with a standard like this, to link together what happens. There are some pretty strong standards and laws applied all over Europe that now come together, and that's very interesting. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is another example where we go into detail about accessible and usable rooms. Again, 9, 10 keys that sort of explain what happens in this figure. And we have attempted to also, in the figure itself, enhance elements like good visual contrast, lighting, sound, hearing enhancement systems, acoustics, indoor climate, issues that are important for everybody. And then comes, this is in a reverse order, seating options, different seating options, for instance, for persons who need extra circulation space, maneuvering space, adequate door width, and accessible route. Again, the accessible route showed in yellow here goes all the way from outside of the room, through the door, through the room, and up to where the presenter stands. This is actually a conference room. So this is our way of trying to give, again, the overview in a visual way, which we think is important when we deal with architects and planners who may not always have the time to try to grasp the essence of 200-300 pages of information. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this one about with another example, main issues. Most of what happens here is again an accessible route from when you at home look for information on, for instance, railway connections, your timetables. It starts with information you probably today gather via your mobile phone, and some of the standards in Europe now and laws require this kind of information to be accessible for everybody, according to a standard called 301-549, I think it is. And this is again where we start the journey, and then comes excerpts from some of those railway infrastructure standards that are also via the TSI-PIM technical specifications for interoperability, part of the law in Europe, demanding accessible facilities, accessible ICT, signage, sound, acoustics, according to certain standards, lighting, seating, and level access of some kind to the rolling stock. So it's again to give an overview of plus some details that might be usable for the people who are not familiar with this area and don't know about the connections to what's really what you have to know about in European standardization, European law today. Next slide, please. Yeah, here we've got an example of some detailed issues where We look at the latest research on, for instance, stairs, adequate foot support, and try to inform people what's important. Actually, it could be, for instance, the depth of a step on stairs going down, which is actually what decides how many accidents you probably will encounter on this type of stair. The next figure shows something about examples of incorrect surfaces of routes, making people think about not adding tripping hazards or slipping accidents to surfaces. In some regulations, building regulations in several countries, some of this is not very well stated or very clearly stated. So we thought it important to highlight it here with these incorrect solutions, which are then crossed over with a red cross. The third one is about absorption of noise in rooms, a big problem today because we tend to have a lot of rooms without too much absorbing surfaces. And what's modern today is to have very open, very bare rooms with not too much that absorbs excessive noise. So that's a third detail issue. Next, please. Next issue. Next slide, please. Yeah. And we take people into also not doing everything about buildings where you can live, but adaptable housing, dwellings. We try to highlight some of the most important things you can do if you want to have the possibility of staying in your apartment, in your house for your whole life. Having access to outdoors, your living area, seating area, where you sleep, where you cook, and your sanitary facilities. And we take people also to an accessible museum display, and again, some of the same ingredients: lighting, contrast, visual contrast, the sound, how it is, there's too much reverberation. We talk about tactile elements that you can, for instance, offer to people who are not able to see, or they could be for children. Again, there's something about ICT equipment, which today comprises a very big part of a museum display. And then come back to some of those traditional things like maneuvering space, having things in the right height for seated and standing persons. And the third figure takes you also to an accessible beach service point with all the elements that should be in place, ought to be in place there. So it's a pretty extensive standard. We haven't managed to illustrate everything, but we've tried to do what we can to give a good overview and also make it more interesting for people who look at the standard the first time and say, yeah, there's something for me, and it's not too difficult to access. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, this is our final slide of this part of the presentation. It's fine with all these documents. It's not enough. We need to have everything in the public, in the built environment in place via procurement, architects that know about things, facility managers that accesses and understand the issues. And we still need building legislation requirements in building regulations to support all of this. But now we got this standard, the 17210, and it says here it's a PR, it's not anymore. It is actually in place in all countries, and it has been available for a couple of months, I think, by now. So, yeah, and we hope it's a good contribution to a society of all ages and diversities and making it a reality. So at least I think the countries who have participated have been really going into this in a very serious manner, and have supported our team enormously. So yeah, thank you. That was it.
Okay, thank you. Can we have the next slide? I will immediately go on to the tier 76-621 presentation. Next slide, please. The main difference to the EN is that this document is a technical report. What is it about? This implies that it is not a EN standard with requirements or recommendations. Therefore, this document has also no obligation at national level. So there may be countries who say, oh, that's a nice, useful report for our national standardization, and we will implement it as a supportive document, including lots of information. But there may be also other countries who may have standards, or due to other reasons, they will not implement it in the national standardization documents. That means it has informative content only. It refers to state-of-the-art examples derived from other standards. It shows technical criteria how the functional requirements and recommendations of the EN has to be fulfilled. Therefore, this document has the same structure than the EN, with the same clauses and sub-clauses. We have the clauses numbered and the sub-clauses A, B, C, D. So you see all the requirements when you look at the two documents in parallel. You'll see on the right-hand side the EN functional requirement, and see on the technical report the specific technical specifications. In some areas, there are different solutions shown from different countries, but in the most areas, we show figures, examples of good practice reflecting the ISO 21542. Let's say about 80% of the standard will deal with the ISO 21542 examples. It is very important to consider that this technical report is not a standalone document, and it has to be used alongside with the EN. And alternatively, of course, you can every time replace it with your national standard or with your national regulation. Next slide, please. And the main source of information, as already said, is the ISO 21542, the last published version, and of course, considering also the improvements in the revised version, which is just now under formal vote decision. And as additional sources, as already mentioned in my first presentation, the EN of the railway applications on infrastructure, other specific ENs, national standards, or other guidance on specific matters. Next slide, please. And with this slide, Soren will show you some examples how we have dealt with in the technical report with additional figures showing our approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. This slide here is a boarding points example with a minibus and taxi arriving at a place where you can be picked up or set down, and it could be for a larger van, or it could be a bus also. And with this figure, we've had the same challenge as everywhere else. How do we also ensure that the standard is inclusive and explain things in a proper manner to, for instance, people with vision impairments? And the idea has been to extend the keys, the key text to the figures enough to make them understandable by all. Because we know there are often challenges if you do the ordinary things like having alternative text on figures. It sometimes disappears when you read a proper standard which is locked to your computer. Depends on the software you got, but we ended up with trying to solve this by having these quite extensive key texts in the figures, we think, and that should be a proper way of doing it, at least. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a comparison of what what you see in the EN standard and the equivalent handling of the same issue in the TR 1761. And it's the famous profile of handrails, which have been used as an example from very early. And on the left, we got what's in the EN, and it shows you in a qualitative way what we think is a good handrail. It's taken over very much from the ISO standard. And again, here we have shown examples of handrail profiles that are not really suitable. And that is to be more explicit as to what to avoid, because our experience tells us that if we don't do, for instance, in legislation, tell people you are not allowed to kill your neighbor, well, there will be persons doing it, and we do come up with active examples in regulations, in laws, and so we're doing a little bit of that here in the end by to support these qualitative requirements we got there. On the right, you see the actual profiles of handrails with the dimensions, and again taken over very much from the ISO standard, extended a little bit. So that's how it works. So you always have to read these two together in order to get the right message. Next slide, please. We've extended the number of general examples shown in the EN and given some more. And these are just general ones without any kind of figures and numbers. Next slide, please. And then supplied some diagrams that we've developed early to explain this field, which is with visual contrast, which is pretty difficult for most people and consultants to grasp. So there's a whole series of different visual contrast diagrams that relate to the various methods that are applied in various standards and countries. So that should provide you with a simpler way of understanding what it's all about. Next slide, please. This is pedestrian crossing. General example on the left shows the use of tactile walking surfaces for guidance and attention. And we very early found out that countries were not too happy about seeing anything but their own version of this. So we ended up making this very general. And then on the right, you see 7 miniatures that you will find in our Annex B that shows from 7 different countries how things are supposed to be laid out correctly there. And the interesting thing is that no country does the same as any other country. Well, except maybe for Ireland and the UK. But otherwise, it's so different. Anything is used for any purpose, be it guidance or attention. So that's really interesting, and I think it illustrates how you can actually maybe learn something from other countries that do things in a different way. But it's also very interesting to have this collection to make you aware that, yeah, you have to look at what's the way of the standardized way of doing it, maybe on the local jurisdiction. You can't always just rely on the EN and the TR report here. Yeah. Next slide, please. This is a slide showing wayfinding in railway infrastructure. It's got the standard there, and the law about this is pretty interesting actually, and could give you some inspiration as to what to do in practice. So this is an example figure from there. Next slide, please. Lighting, we try to convey what's in the lighting standards. For instance, lighting levels uniformity is something very often specified in the TR. So we give an idea as to what should you be aware of, what are some of the critical elements when you plan for it. If you don't know about the standard, This gives you an introduction, and it sends you further to this standard with some basic knowledge. To the right, there's one about acoustics and speech intelligibility, and that's another EN and also an ISO, I think, that gives you, again, a simplified diagram as to what are the acceptance levels, how understandable is, for instance, sentences when you got an STI, a speech transmission index of this and that number. So often difficult to grasp at first hand, but I think with simplified figures like this, it does help you. Next slide, please. Yeah, again, comparison of what's in the EN. It's changing places, which is a new concept, I think, to many countries. It's taken very much from the UK, and it just shows what's in the functional part, which is the EN, and what is it that you'd actually find in the technical report, an example with dimensions for everything. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, signage, height of that. Yeah, let's just jump to the last one. Next slide, please. We've been trying on the way to also cope with some of those issues that came up that where we don't really have any good solutions, and we've been trying to locate solutions to the problems that come up. For instance, when you introduce a lot of bike lanes, bike paths in cities to cope with congestion, and you want to have more people using bicycles, that unavoidably means that it's pretty difficult, for instance, for a vision impaired person to find safely your way from the bus platform to the footway, because you have very often to cross a bike lane. And yeah, this shows, the figure on the right shows an example of how you can at least partially avoid this. So this was the final slide, just showing you a range of issues that we've tried to solve with the TR1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soren and Monica. So our next speaker, well, you have a very broad and clear comprehension on the EN and on tier 1, which has the one has the functional requirements, the other has the technical specifications, and now Delfín Jiménez is going to explain us the next stage, which is how to assess that. Delfín Jiménez is a project team expert. He's a doctor in architecture. He's a planner. He has an access consulting. He works at Equar Architecture. Delfín has a doctor, is a PS doctor in architecture by the Polytechnic University of Madrid. He's currently the director of the architectural firm Equar Planning, Building and Accessibility. He's participating in several projects of international standards on accessibility for representing UNE, and also in Sensenalec, and also in ISO, and also with the European Commission. He has an extensive experience as a universal accessibility consultant with entities such as Fundación, Predif, Union. He collaborates with AENOR and INAC as an expert in certification audits in accessibility. He's also a professor of the Master of Accessibility at the University of Jaén, a lecturer in numerous other courses at the Polytechnic University of Madrid, the College of Architecture of Madrid, the Madrid Council. He has several publications on accessibility in the physical environment and has participated as a speaker at numerous international conferences. He also a board member of ASEPAU, which is the Spanish Association for Professionals of Universal Accessibility, and IAAP, which is the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So Delfín, please illustrate us.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Good morning, everybody. This second technical report is about how to assess conformity against this new standard. the EN 17 to 10. I don't know if I can pass. Okay. Oh, sorry. Well, I think now it's all right. First of all, I want to say that this document, this TR 17622, is a methodology. It's not a recipe book or a checklist. And then there are 4 key issues: the who, what, when, and how to assess. And also it's important to consider the working process with 3 parts: the selection with the specification of scope and parameters, the determination, filling of tables, requirements, assessment tools, evidences, and also the attestation with the final conclusion. Let's go to see briefly the different cases. First, who assesses? Different players for different goals. All of you know that there are different types of conformity assessment, not only in accessibility, that is general. We can find first-party assessment, that is self-assessment or property or internal audits, or a second-party assessment, that is user assessment or stakeholders audits. And finally, it's possibly a third-party assessment, for instance, an inspection or a certification assessment. Well, different types of conformity with different goals. And also it's important to consider that we have different players in the assessment. We have the client, the auditor, the accessibility advisor, the validator. And it's very important, don't mix, don't confuse the different role in the process of the conformity assessment. Well, the second key is what to assess. Of course, the clauses of this new standard, and specifically the functional requirements. But first of all, it's important to define the scope, identify the limits that we are going to assess. And after that, it's important to choose, to select, to know what functional requirements we have to consider. Depending on the scope, it's necessary one section or other sections of the standards, because maybe not all the world standard applies in our specific case. And then these functional requirements that we are going to assess is necessary to check with a reference document. The reference document is possibility. We can use the national standard or national regulation, or alternatively, the previous technical report, tier 1, that my colleagues explained a few minutes before. The second thing is when specifics of conformity assessment in different phases. Which phases in the conformity assessment? Well, it's possible to assess in the inception, in the feasibility phase, or it's possibility a conformity assessment in the planning, in design phase, or maybe in construction phase, and also it's possible a conformity assessment in the completion, is a post-occupancy phase. And then there are different phases with different specific characteristics. That is important that we consider the difference among that. And also it's important to introduce the idea of the review of conformity assessment, considering renovation or suspension, because a conformity assessment is not forever. And then it's important to consider when we are talking about when to assess. Next key is how to assess. I said before that we have different tools for the conformity assessment. And then it's important to select the different techniques depending of the part of the working process that we have. It's possible selecting different techniques relating to selection and determination part, for instance, sampling, testing, inspection, validation, or relating to attestation and surveillance, for instance, review, accreditation, suspension. And after that, which tools? What is the most appropriate tools for each phase, and also knowing which error range we have, etc. Well, at the end of the annex, you have a conformity assessment templates. There are blank tables with different parts of assess process. First of all, the selection with the reference. Then there we can fill who, that is the type of the conformity. It's first part, second part, or third part assessment, and we can define the scope. We can define the phase of the conformity, and then we go to the second part, the validation. Validation, we specify what functional requirements we are going to assess, and with what tools, and with our notes and the evidence. And finally, we must conclude with a general attestation to summarize a global point of view of the different functional requirements that we are testing. Well, briefly, we can see a small example for one requirement. Depending on the phases, the elements, the type of the conformity, etc., the table has to be customized in one way or another. For instance, in this scenario of a conformity assessment of a square in design phase, if we want check signates according EN, you can see in the table in left side what the functional requirement is about signates. We can select this from EN 713 letter B. Okay, and after that, in the same thing, we select which tools we are going to use for this. After that, we have the evidence, our notes. In this case, I invent. Well, maybe there is a not pedestrian signage plan because we are checking the project, and there is not a pedestrian signage plan. Well, and then we assessment that we are in the design phase. Then maybe it's possible to say pending verification in the next stage. Well, this is our assessment for this functional requirement. But if now we are going to do exactly the same, but in other phase, the same square, the same situation, but in different phase, under construction. Under construction, now we can verify, but using different tool. How? With the project. Now we are going with a visual inspection, and then we can verify that they detected the gap and from the previous conformity assessment, and they corrected And now there is adequate pedestrian signage, and then we can check and say, okay, now is valid this specific functional requirements. With this easy example, you can see that you can see first how to customize the table, how it's important to define the tools, the importance of the evidence, and also that different phases have different goals, different tools, and it's important to know when we are going to use the table. Well, to conclude, only 4 things. The first, this is a methodology. It's not a recipe book or a closed checklist. The second idea, this is a conformity with the functional requirements. Functional requirements is not about national requirements or national parameters or something like that. It's about functional requirements from the EN. But the third idea, we need supporting reference, and then we can use the national legislation or the tier 1. And finally, depending on the phase, different types of tools will be used. Depending on the scope, the complexity of the element space, several subdivisions will be considered. Then tailor to suit each assessment case, scope, phases. Imagine, for instance, several staircases in a building or something like that, and then we can choose what is exactly that we need. Well, that's all. Thank you for your attention, and remember, you can also send to the secretary of JTC 11, Fernando Machicado. I'm sure he will be happy to answer your questions, or maybe at the very end of this workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Delphine. Well, after taking this, this view of the documents produced by M420, we are going to have now a user's perspective. Our intention is knowing what's the impact or on the users, or what's the impact expected on users. We are classified in between public legislators and public procurers, people with disabilities, consumers, and architects. So first of all, the first speaker will be Tatiana Alemán. I'm going to shorten a lot the bio because of the delay. I don't want to steal you time from the presentation, but for the bio. So Tatiana Alemán is the Manager Director of the State Reference Center for Personal Autonomy and Technical Assistance, which is the CEAPAT, dependent on the INSERSO, which is the Institute for Elderly and Social Services, and the Ministry of Social Rights and Agenda 2030. She's been working in the areas of accessibility and disability since 2004, and she has coordinated and developed projects related to universal accessibility in different areas, in building, urban planning, tourism and culture, transportation, and new technologies. So I'm going to stop there at the very bio, Tatiana, and I give you the floor. Thank you very much, Tatiana. Tatiana, you are muted. You need to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning to all. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this workshop representing CEAPAT INSERSO. Allow me also the opportunity to congratulate everyone who participated in the development of this standard, and to thank you for the effort made to agree on functional common accessibility criteria based on so many divergent and specific technical regulations for each country and including regions of the European Union. We are all aware that every day a greater number of people benefit from accessible technologies, environments, and services. Accessibility not only favors people with disabilities and the elderly, but makes life easier for a large part of the population also. Public procurement accounts for a large part of the market for goods and services. If public administration tenders do not take accessibility into account, discrimination will be financed. Spain and most European countries have signed the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and must ensure that the criteria of universal accessibility and the principle of non-discrimination are met. Countries like the United States and Canada have been seeing the importance of accessibility in public purchases, making their companies leaders in this area. Europe is highly committed to responding to the challenges of social and technological innovation through public procurement. In this sense, Law 9/2017 of November 8 on public sector contracts, by which the directives of the European Parliament and of the Council 2014-23 EU and 2014-24 EU are transposed into the Spanish legal system of February 26, 2014, includes social and accessibility clauses to take advantage of the impact of public tenders. Require compliance with accessibility criteria by default in the public tenders will benefit many people who need accessible facilities, products, and services. It will also ensure equal opportunities for all people and will force many companies to be competitive, innovative, and respond better to customer demands. The accessibility market will be strengthened and the administration will fulfill their functions of promoting social, technological, innovation, and responsibility for the well-being of present and future generations. This fact requires the commitment for everyone with political and public procurement policy responsibilities, and the support of many entities to facilitate this process. The Observatory of Public Procurement indicates that public procurement represents in Spain approximately 20% of the gross domestic product. As described in the virtual higher education program in the public procurement, the importance of public procurement is not only related to the magnitude of the resource involved, but also the impact with which the state efficiently develops its activities and provision for public service and relationship established with different social factors, including companies, suppliers, public and private workers, as well as the general public. In addition, public purchases are an instrument with great influence on social, environmental, and innovation policies. Through public procurement, governments can lead by example and achieve fundamental policy goals. It presents an opportunity to drive market towards innovation, sustainability, accessibility, and social progress. The recently published European Strategy on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2021-2030 states that the European Commission will provide practical guidance to member states to support the implementation of accessibility obligation through directives on public procurement and promote the training of public buyers to buy accessible products. Furthermore, EU rules makes accessibility requirements mandatory for member states to benefit from shared management funds. Furthermore, the purchase of accessible goods, services, and infrastructures is an obligation in public procurement. It also encourages member states to integrate accessibility financing into recovery and resilience plans. Spain's case of recovery, transformation, and resilience plan, Spain Can, refers to the investment in the application of accessibility criteria in a transversal way within all environments, physical and virtual, through the future Spain Plan Accessible Country. It also takes a special impact on the application of accessibility in digital products and services, in health systems, and in all types of public service. The EN 17210 standard, accessibility and usability of the built environment, is a useful and pedagogical tool to train those responsible for public administration on the accessibility requirement that can be incorporated into the contract specification of public works and renovation tenders in order to guarantee the autonomy and usability of future environments for all people. Compliance with accessibility can also be required, citing the standard as a requirement that the winning company must meet with its design and construction project. From a legal point of view, the standard can serve as a reference for review, updating, standardization of criteria defined in the multiple Spanish regulation on accessibility for the mandatorily built environment, be they national, regional, or municipal. In practice, there are more than 20. The application of this standard in the European Union with common criteria will facilitate in the medium and long term that people with disabilities and older people will be able to circulate and travel through the 27 countries with reasonable guarantees and homogeneous criteria, accessibility criteria. For tourism in Europe, this is especially relevant when one takes into account that in 2019, travelers over 50 years of age represented 47% of travelers in the EU, and that according to the study carried out by the University of Surrey in 2040 for the European Commission, travelers with accessibility needs contribute annually at least 400 billion euros to the European economy and generate 87 million jobs. promoting accessible environments and transportation throughout the EU will increase these figures. In addition, the application of this rule will facilitate mobility for work or educational purposes for young people and adults with disabilities, an aspect currently with many possibilities for improvement. In 2019, only 0.14% of students who participated in the Erasmus program were students with disabilities, whom due to their accessibility requirements needed a scholarship with a higher economic endowment to solve the lack of accessibility in the university and or the destination, and hiring of on-site personal assistant when they were needed. Another positive aspect of this standard to highlight is how it addresses accessibility in both public and private environments, such as housing. Its application will contribute to the construction of housing models prepared from the beginning, adapting to accessibility needs of its residents, which change throughout their lifespan. In addition, it is a success in the standard to link home-to-home automation and social health equipment provided through technological tools that will be regulated by the European Accessibility Act. This is very important considering the accelerated aging of the European population and the need to migrate from institutionalized housing models to community life that stimulate active and healthy aging. The standard also correctly introduces the concept of accessibility statement, a tool that not only allows the manager of the built environment to monitor its level of compliance and capacity for improvement, but at the same time serves to objectively inform potential users and customers what they will find in that environment and allows them to decide for themselves whether it is accessible to them according to their particular needs. Finally, acknowledge and be thankful that this rule has been work done as should be done for any plan, project, or regulation that affects our lives as citizens, constituting a multidisciplinary team in which public administrations, architecture and urban planning professionals, experts in the field, and above all, potential users with accessibility needs represented by the EDF and H Platform Europe have been included. Before concluding, I want to congratulate my colleague Nieves Peinado for her participation in the drafting of this standard as expert in accessibility and as a representative of the Spanish public administration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Well, the next user will be represented by Meher Habokoyan. Sorry, Meher, you start with the same with your.
I will say how it sounds.
He's an accessibility officer at the European Disability Forum, the EDF, who are one of our key stakeholders. He joined the EDF in 2019, Meher is responsible for accessibility and freedom of movement of people with disabilities, covering areas and policies such as transport, built environment, accessibility of goods and services, ICT and new technologies, research, consumer rights, and standardization. He's been one of the experts participating in the drafting of the EN, and well, he's got a double master in global studies from the University of Leipzig and London School of Economics and Political Science. So please, Meher, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Fernando. So as Fernando introduced, I'm Meher Akopian, representing the European Disability Forum. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak and represent users with disabilities today and to provide the perspective of persons with disabilities, why we need a European approach to accessibility of the built environment. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So the content, briefly, just to mention that first I will introduce what our organization is and what we do, and then go to why the standard is important for persons with disabilities, and how we were involved in the development of the standard, and then in the end, some final thoughts and recommendations, what still can be done to improve the situation, and questions we will leave at the end of the webinar. If there is time, of course, Fernando will tell us. So to go to the next slide. Thank you. So on the picture on the left side of the screen, you will see the photo of our executive board members, and this is the governing structure of the European Disability Forum, which I represent. It's an organization consisting of more than 100 other organizations of persons with disabilities on national level, but also on European level. At the European level, there are more organizations that represent certain types of disabilities. So we are kind of an umbrella organization comprising from all these organizations and represent over 100 million persons with disabilities in the EU. We are, of course, advocating for the rights of persons with disabilities, and the main aim is basically to ensure that the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was ratified by the EU as a region, but also by all member states of the EU, to ensure its implementation. And our motto is nothing about us without us, which basically means that we have to be involved in all the policies and actions that affect the lives of persons with disabilities. Thank you. So we go to the next slide, where I talk about why we need this standard, and first addressing the problems that are still there, and why the standard is needed to remedy those issues. First of all, we see that in the EU, in Europe, there are still different approaches to accessibility. There are different requirements at national level, even on regional or local level. You have different rules on accessibility of the built environment. Sometimes the construction codes are not up to date, or there is an issue with their implementation. Also, the design for all approach, which is the approach of the Convention to accessibility, is not really a prevalent approach to accessibility in many cases, which leads to unequal rights for persons with disabilities vis-a-vis other citizens of the EU, and also to a fragmented market and the loss for business, of course, because they lose a lot of the consumer base that they could potentially have. I'm not sure if there is data on EU level on this, but in the US, for example, it's assessed that this so-called disability market, which includes customers with disabilities and their families, they represent US $1 trillion market, US market. In the UK, it's 128 billion. In Canada, it was calculated to be 25 billion. So as we see, it's a huge consumer base, which is not being properly, let's say, used as in its potential. So it's not only about the rights of persons, but also on the side of the industry and business. This is a big missed opportunity. And of course, there are still no other instruments at EU level. We would, of course, prefer like more legislative instruments. on built environment accessibility, but the standard is a very, very good first step, and that's why we have been involved in its development. To go one slide further, we can talk about the benefits of, thank you. The benefits of the standard, of a European standard, why it's good for people, as I mentioned, because it will ensure freedom of movement for all EU citizens, which is a right given in the EU treaties. You have more than 100 million persons with disabilities, and this number is set to rise. We have also, I think in 2019, it was estimated 19 million persons who are over the age of 65. And this number is also going to double by 2050. And as you see, I put a fun fact that actually people who are considered to be in the very old category, which is over 100 years old, this number is going to rise 5-fold in comparison to the average number of all older persons. So this means that in the future, the accessibility will be more and more relevant even than today. So we need to prepare ourselves, and we need to ensure that everybody has the same rights of traveling, of living in the community, etc. And these are rights that are enshrined in the EU Convention and in European treaties also. And when we say design for all, we mean design for all, as the European standard is, of course, the main target are persons with disabilities or older persons, or generally persons with reduced mobility, but accessibility, of course, can benefit a wider base of wider societal base, basically everybody. To go to the next slide, we talk a bit about the benefits to business, as I mentioned. Certainly, there will be more certainty for the building industry, because if you're a company which is, let's say, doing work in Germany but would like to start projects in Belgium, they don't. If they have one requirement or one guidance to follow, it will be easier for them. Often accessibility is seen to be as a cost, it's something expensive, but this is definitely not the case. There were studies done, for example, in 2004, there was a study done by the Technical University of Zurich. A similar study was done in Germany. The Zurich study showed that the cost of making a new building accessible from the outset only costs on average 1.8% of the entire construction cost. Or if it's a big project, it's even less than that. While on the other hand, when you don't have accessibility, when you don't ensure it actually makes things more expensive because you are losing a lot of the profit that you would otherwise have. The study that was commissioned by the European Commission on the accessible tourism and its impact on the economy, its economic impact was already mentioned, so I will not go in too much detail, but you can see the numbers, how many persons with access needs there was estimated, and the contribution that they could make to the hospitality and tourism sector, and in relation to the recovery from COVID. And we know that this sector was one of the most hardest hit, so this is especially relevant to ensure that that everybody can benefit from accessible tourism and hospitality services, at the same time contributing to this sector as consumers. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as I said, because this is such an important standard, we've been involved in since the very beginning of the mandate. I, of course, joined only in 2019, but before that, my colleagues were involved. We've been participating in the Sense-Senelec Joint Technical Committee that is drafting the standard. We also participated in different workshops that were held over the years, including, so like this workshop. Thank you for the invitation again. Sometimes we invited our members when there were specific topics that were more relevant for them. For example, when we were discussing the chapters on lifts and on the interface, on the user interface of lifts, which was and its accessibility for persons who are blind or have visual impairments. This was relevant, so our members from EBU joined and raised their points. We've also given input to the draft itself. We've published position papers, also supported the process through communication, making statements or having webinars. For example, last September, we had a webinar with ANEC before the adoption of the standard to encourage members to get involved at national level and support the adoption process. And the structures at EDF that we involve in all this work is we have 2 expert groups that are relevant for this. One is specifically on built environment and the other one on standardization. So we advise these policy and technical experts on the input that we give to the development of the standard. We ask them also to be engaged at national level where they are based, to kind of lobby and to engage with the national standardization bodies. And of course, to our wider national basis, to our members, we ask the same to engage in national standardization processes. So to go forward, it's the last point about what can be still done or how things can be further improved to have a more accessible way forward. For the first step, of course, we know that the approval of the technical reports are important. So hopefully that will be done, and by end of April, we will achieve that. I think Monica mentioned in her presentation about the consistency about between different standards and how what is the main standard that would define accessibility, and because we've seen some different understanding of accessibility and different standardization working groups, so this issue would be good to resolve. Another point is to raise more awareness, of course. Not only that this standard, what are the requirements of the standards, but also about its benefits, fostering expertise of other stakeholders, architects, for example, designers, construction professionals, etc. Then we have to maybe address more how the standard will be implemented. So just not only to have this very, very useful guide, but actually to make sure that it's used by different professionals and by policymakers, by public procurers. So public procurement can be a very good driver of accessibility. This was also mentioned by other speakers. We would ideally like to see that the standard is referenced in national rules and regulations, but also in the future, maybe in the Accessibility Act. And we just like to highlight that now is a very good chance for countries to update the national laws and building codes of accessibility in the built environment, given the publication of this standard, but also the transposition process of the European Accessibility Act. And lastly, it's important to hire experts with disabilities, because they are often not only policy and technical experts, but their experiential experience gives a lot of bring a lot of valuable input to making built environment accessible. And the last slide of today is, thank you, generally about the European standardization system, how to make it more inclusive. As I said, we had a very good working cooperation with during the development of the standard in the Joint Technical Committee. But of course, things can always further be improved. For example, participation cost barriers or accessibility barriers can always be thought to be removed. At the European level, we had no issues, for example, with accessible meetings and documents, etc. I'm not completely aware of the national situation, so just something to highlight in case we would ideally have standards. There were also questions from the public today about the fees for standards, which can also be a barrier. Then to have more level playing field, to have better cooperation with between industry and users at national level, would be good, and also more decision-making power to users' representations. For example, we are involved in the drafting, but we don't have a voting right. So that's also a way to strengthen users' engagement in standardization. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Meher. So next expert will be Chiara Giovannini. Chiara Giovannini is the Senior Manager and Deputy Secretary General at ANEC. She works for ANEC since 2002. First a Program Manager and presently a Senior Manager, Policy and Innovation and Deputy Secretary General. Apart from deputizing for the Secretary General, CD's ANEC works on accessibility and digital society and is responsible for horizontal and strategic policy issues. Prior to working for ANEC, Ms. Giovannini worked at Swiss Consumers Organization. She holds a master's degree in European law, and Mrs. Giovannini represents ANEC at high-level events, committees, and research advisory boards. For example, she was a member of the European Commission high-level group on artificial intelligence and ethics. ANEC is the European consumer voice in standardization and defends the European consumer interest in the creation of technical standards and European laws and public policies making use of standards. Thank you, Chiara.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here with you on behalf of ANEC. Next, please. As it has been mentioned, ANEC mission is to represent consumers in standardization. We complement the national delegation principle. Accessibility is one of our main priorities, and we have a strong collaboration with the European Disability Forum. Next. Let's talk about some facts and figures. Public procurement, which is the buying of works, goods, and services by public bodies, accounts for over 14% of the EU gross domestic product. And we can expect that in the post-pandemic economy, this will increase. At the international level, the public procurement commitments under the World Trade Organization agreement have been estimated around 1.3 trillion. It's really a lot of money. At the European level, we have the EU public procurement law to make sure that the public sector gets the best value for money. And I would like you to remember best value for money. When we look at the figures, almost more than half of the EU procurement procedures use the lowest price as the only award criterion for public contracts. This indicates that the authorities are not taking into account the social, sustainability, and innovation criteria. But it is our money, and it has to be spent to benefit all of us. Next. So as consumers, what do we expect? We expect that the public money, which is our money, is used to best used in order to meet the needs of the community. It is not only the price which is important, but also the social and green considerations. Value for money doesn't mean cheapest option. Inclusive design standardization is a suitable tool to complement accessibility legislation. But it is also a challenge for standards developers. And so there are some new standards on accessibility, but much more needs to be done. Accessibility to the built environment is not only for access and use of the built environment by persons with disabilities, but also for their safety by creating an environment where risks are prevented and reduced. Also important is to remember the commitment of the countries around the world to develop and deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Those are different goals, and access to the built environment is linked to several of the goals of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Standards adopted by unanimity on accessibility to the built environment can show commitment to accessibility and inclusive society. Next, what is our involvement? As it has been mentioned, the work started many, many years ago, and ANEC was at the origin of this work. We are very proud to have been the originator of this work together with the European Commission. We had to organize very intensive lobbying to have this standardization mandate approved, because unfortunately, more than 10 years ago, there was still a lot of resistance to accessibility at the European level. Several CENELEC members were not convinced, as they thought it could be in contradiction to mandatory national requirements. You have been shown this is not the case. It has been explained, but back more than 10 years ago, we were facing those problems. The work started formally in 2009, but the experts were selected in 2010. It has already been mentioned that the ANEC expert Monica was selected for both the first and the second phase, and she has been presenting to you the details of the standards. Other ANEC experts are also part of the project team, Carol, Isabella, and we are again very proud to have been involved and contributed with such high-level experts. And as mentioned, we work hand in hand with the European Disability Forum. Last year, we organized a webinar in order to support the approval of this standard. And we were very happy to see that the standard was approved by a great majority of standardization bodies. The initial reactions were very positive. Now, the standard is about functional requirements. It has already been explained this morning. What is this about? My main message to you, and I've seen that in the questions, there were a couple of questions about it, is that it doesn't take precedence on the national standards. They can continue to be used. If there is no national standard, then another deliverable, the technical report on the requirement, can be used. Next. To conclude, first of all, an enormous thank you to the European Commission, to CENELEC Joint Technical Committee 11, and to the project team, especially Monica, for their exceptional work and for making this very long journey together. As consumers, we expect to be able to go out and about, whatever our age and ability is. Standards have to be developed in an inclusive manner to realize the full potential of legislative instruments such as the public procurement legislation. And in order to meet consumer expectations, European functional accessibility requirement for public procurement as technical specification or award criteria, or in support of conformity processes, have to be developed. This was the case for this specific standard. We now call on the national standardization bodies and committees to form their position on the remaining standards in an open and inclusive manner and to support their approval. And from our side, as consumers, we will continue to actively contribute to this important endeavor. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Thank you very much for all the contributions of ANEC to the European standardization, which are seen in the outcome of these mandates. Fionnuala, please. Fionnuala will be the last person talking about the user's point of view. She's the co-director of the International Union of Architects and Architecture for All Work Program. She's a past vice president of the Irish Architects Institute that is currently co-director of the International Union of Architects Work Program, Architecture for All. She's principal of Fionnuala Rogerson Architects and also teaches at the Architectural Professional Practice Diploma course in the University College Dublin. Fionnuala, please.
Thank you, Fernando, and delighted to be here. First slide, please. So I would like to just give a very warm welcome to this standard, to the publication of it, and to the two forthcoming technical reports. It's so important that we have a harmonized approach across Europe and a common understanding of these functional requirements. We've heard today about the complexity of the issues and how difficult it has been arising from the starting point when all these different standards were investigated across Europe and where we have seen the diversity in approach. So now at last we're moving together towards a common approach. What I really welcome about the way in which the functional standards have been written is the introduction to each standard by the inclusion of a rationale. I've always felt that once designers understand what the reason for doing something in a particular way is, they will do it. They are by their training designers and they will find solutions, and maybe not solutions that everybody will find naturally in a standard, but once the understanding is there, there is a way forward. I also welcome the clear distinction between requirements and recommendations by the use of the shall and the should, as would normally happen in standards. But it helps a lot for us to see what are the things that are absolutely essential and where it is recommended that they should be achieved. Next slide, please. And of course, as architects, most of us tend to remember the diagrams, the illustrations, and with this standard, which is quite unusual for standards, we have plenty of simple, clear illustrations which serve as very effective reminders to us all. Soren went through these in some detail, and I really congratulate you on the inclusion of so many illustrations, which are not easy to do. And I know that they will be of enormous help, particularly to architects who I think sometimes really hate having to read the text in a standard. Next slide, please. So I'd like to emphasize the importance of education and training at all levels. We need it at both undergraduate level for students, and we need it at professional level. And those types of training can tend to be quite different from each other. We also need it across all built environment sectors. Architects get mentioned and designers get mentioned a lot, but more and more I see in the area of accessibility the need for electrical engineers and civil engineers and landscape architects to have a very equal understanding of the functional standard as the more typical architect and other designers. So we need the type of training we need needs to be both general for the average person in practice, but also I believe that we need accredited training. We need to be able to know that when a person is being appointed to a design team, that they have the necessary expertise to be able to advise on all aspects, because the standards cover such a broad range of topics and areas that it is a study in itself. And of course, the other training that is very important is for those who are doing the conformity assessment. Next slide, please. Going forward, I believe research, Emma, I think mentioned research was something that is being developed, but we really do need solid research to support these requirements and recommendations. I think Mayor mentioned access to standards and how for so many people there is a big cost involved in accessing standards. And when you think that the vast majority of architectural practices across Europe have 10 people or less, and many of them are only 2 or 3 people, the actual cost of using standards is very prohibitive. That's why they will revert to building regulations. What will be great will be to have this standard and its technical reports used when individual member states are updating their national standards and regulations. I would also mention the importance of updating this standard on a regular basis. Again, Emma mentioned that it started back in 2003. She mentioned 2006. We heard about the appointment of experts in 2010. We've been almost 20 years. In fact, it is over 20 years since a European group, an expert group appointed by the European Commission, made a recommendation that this standard be developed. So it's taken us 20 years to get here. We can't leave it another 20 years before we start updating it. We need to start updating it straight away. Next slide, please. And also, I know that the original mandate had recommended that there should be a toolkit to enable easy access to the standard, both for use, and that toolkit should include the requirements and recommendations. It should include technical details. It should also include national standards. Perhaps the national standards bodies could include their functional and technical standards, and national building regulations could be included as well, to make it easy so that when a designer picks up the standard, and I was nearly going to weigh these standards because I printed them out, and they've come to about 3 kilos in terms of paperweight. Not a good thing to print them out, but there is so much in them, so much good information, that it is quite difficult to access everything quickly and easily. So we do need this toolkit, which will relate the standard and the technical report back to our national standards and regulations. So if possible, it would be great to see that as the next step. And finally, my last slide. I would, like everybody else, really like to thank everyone involved in this. I mean, the project teams obviously have done an enormous amount of work. The national mirror committees also across the 15 countries that were involved, and the other organizations, representative organizations, UNE and ONCE obviously as well, Senelec. And I particularly might like to mention from the EC, the Immaculada, who has been such a driving force on disability issues, accessibility and inclusion issues for so many years. And it's been so great to have that consistency of one person who you know will always drive this agenda and makes great progress. So thank you very much indeed for having me.
Thank you very much, Fionnuala. We are trying, and as next speaker will be, well, first of all, as you know, we have run out completely of time, so all the questions and answers will be answered after the event by email. And now we are going to have the final conclusions from the European Commission, from Katarina Ivanovic and Nevik. She's the Director of Social Affairs at DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion in the European Commission. From 2018, she's the Director of Social Affairs, Social Affairs at the Employment. Before, she worked at the government of Croatia as State Secretary of the Ministry of Labor and Pension System, and before as Director of the Ministry of Economy, Labor and Entrepreneurship. Let me check if she's been able to connect. Okay, so Katerina, I don't know if you can hear me, but you need to connect using the link that I send you. If you use Chrome, you should have absolutely no problem. And try to check in the. You're in Zoom, but the speaker. I see you, Christina. Please, Katerina, go out of the meeting and enter with the link that I sent you by email. I have resent you it a few minutes ago. So if you use Chrome and you enter with that link, you will be able to join us.
Fernando,
yes?
I have made her like a speaker. I think that.
Can you speak now, Katerina? Katarina, it seems that we have already made you a speaker, so you should be able to talk.
No,
Please check that you are unmuted.
I think she has disappeared. He has disconnected.
Oh, I think that you've gone. It seems that she's gone out to enter, as I told her. Sorry. So, these are all those things about technology, and sorry for all this delay. I haven't. It's quite difficult to moderate a meeting when you don't see people and you can. Hello.
Yes, you see me now.
Yes, we see you now, Katerina. Thank you very much.
Hello, and sorry, I was in the Zoom application, but it obviously did not work the best. So thanks a lot, and thank you for having me. And I've been listening to last couple of presentations, and it's really good to see, and it's really good to recognize all the different efforts and all those who contributed that we have today the first standard adopted. Also, my gratitude goes to UNE and ONCE, both for organizing this event, and also to all the colleagues who really took a part and who have participating in the process. And as last speaker pointed, also special thanks, if I may put it that way, goes to indeed our own IMA Plasencia, who has really been a cornerstone of all the accessibility actions that the European Commission has been undertaking. And without her, I'm pretty sure that we would be still far away, and somewhere like in 2008, when we started thinking and started reflecting on the mandate. So happy to close the workshop. This is indeed a good start of the week and good start of let's say, even a celebration of the adoption of the first ever European accessibility standard for the built environment. I understand, and I heard of myself that the workshop has been a success, and that the presentations were very rich and really well received. And just to mention one more time that it's really good to see the positive outcome of the work that Commission initiated really long time ago in 2008 by issuing a mandate number 2020. This also adds to the celebration of the adoption of our strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities 2021-2030. And all of you who have seen the strategy knows that the strategy refers to the outcomes of the standardization work during the whole last decade, and also points to the future standardization work. This standard has indeed taken some time. It took some time for it to be written and adopted, while accessibility of the built environment is an area where a lot of knowledge and lots of developments have been really taking place at the national levels. As some of you know, at the time, the Commission took a risk, as indeed the built environment is an area with strong national competencies, and it was really quite unclear whether there would be an appetite to set the common accessibility requirements. It was a challenge how to bring together the variety of rules, the variety of standards, codes, guidelines that existed at the national level into the one European document. And what I understand from IMA, that over 300 different documents were identified and analyzed. Your work, your joint work, made it possible to have this first ever European accessibility standard for the built environment. It is the fact that persons with disabilities were and still are confronted with similar barriers in all the member states, and that they wanted solutions so that they could work across member states, that when moving for work, moving for holidays or studying, or indeed any other reason that was a convincing argument to start the work. It took more to convince the national experts and authorities of the benefit of having the common solutions at EU level, and the adoption of the Accessibility Act for sure has helped a lot. And those of you who have been following the adoption of the Accessibility Act know very much how we started, what was the ambition at the beginning, what was included in the final outcome, and now when we see the transposition period is expiring slowly, and when member states are very much interested into defining and seeing how to transpose it in their national systems, that the EAA will have a much broader impact than maybe even initially thought. I have seen the standard as a rich document that is impressive, not only how comprehensive it is, but also how well the accessibility solutions are described from the functional perspective, how illustrations and descriptions help to really to understand what needs to be done and why. I have to say it is very convincing. Also, I see that the document is built with in a very pedagogical way, and that it's so important to bring this knowledge to new generations of architects and professionals and skill up those that are practicing today, but are not yet able to build the in the accessible manner. Let me be very clear. Built environment professionals need these skills in the EU, and this document provides a good basis for our future work. More and more of our European policies are making the point of the need to build accessible in the aging society, where persons with disabilities have the right to move freely and access on equal basis with others, any place and any environment. Let me just mention that some of those policies where the outcome of your work can be used, like the European structural funds. They require taking the account of accessibility throughout the preparation and implementation of the programs. And this concerns also buildings, but also other type of infrastructure that is financed by the European structural funds. Just to mention that we also have a public procurement legislation that requires buying accessible. And of course, the European Accessibility Act, allowing member states really to decide to apply the common accessibility requirements in the directive to the built environment where the services in its scope are provided. In addition, our recent policies present accessibility as an element of quality of the construction, going hand in hand with sustainability policies and the energy efficiency. And the whole European Green Deal shows that when making the deep renovations for energy efficiency, it is a win-win to ensure that accessibility and to remove and to prevent all the barriers for persons with disabilities. This is a very important point as for the European funds, also to support the recovery from the COVID crisis, and provides a great opportunity in the years to come to invest and renovate buildings and infrastructure. Let me finish by sharing with you that the Commission launched the new European Bauhaus only a few months ago to shape a movement to explore how to live better together, how to connect people with the different backgrounds, how to create spaces where we live, how to integrate sustainability, aesthetic and inclusion, including accessibility and affordability. I'm also very happy that ONCE is a partner of the new European Bauhaus, and also we know that EDF is trying to partner with the new European Bauhaus and some other NGOs very active in the area of social inclusion. And congratulations, ONCE, congratulations for recognizing the new European Bauhaus as a good initiative. And I'm sure that in the years to come, we will have a lot to say in this respect. In the end, I would just like to finish by stating that this standard and the related technical materials comes available really at a very timely moment when we are in the Europe embracing accessibility in the policies. And once again, I would like really to congratulate all of you who participated in this achievement and encourage the using of the outcome of this mandate 420 in our European policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katerina. And it's been a great opportunity having you closing the meeting. Thank you very much. I think we are really out of time, and the language interpreters are going to hate this. So thank you very much. We will distribute all the information, the YouTube video, all those things, so you will be kept informed, and we will answer the questions in a written manner. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Katerina, for all the support of the European Commission to accessibility and to standardization regarding accessibility. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Aloka. Thank you, all of you.